Oh, yeah, I think everyone's off now. Yeah. Okay, am I off? Mine's off. Mine's on. Yeah. There we are. We're going to start the meeting with confirmation of the panel convener. So is everyone happy for Lyndon Jones to continue as convener for the next 12 months? Is that okay with everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Happy to propose that.
Yes.
I'll second that.
Perfect. There we are. Lovely. And we'll go on to apologies for absence, and I'll do a roll call as well. So we've had no apologies, but we have had an alteration to the membership. Louise Gibbard has come off the panel. Okay, I'll go through a quick roll call. So I've got Cyril Anderson.
Present, Mish.
Thanks. Mike Day.
Yeah, here, thank you.
Mike Dirk. Stephen Gallagher.
I am here.
David Halliwell.
Present.
Lovely. Beverly Hopkins.
Yes, I'm here.
Linda James.
Yes.
Sue Jones.
Yes.
Miles Langstone.
Yes, I'm here.
And Linda Tyler Lloyd.
Present.
And the co-opted members, Dave Anderson Thomas? No. And Alexander Roberts. Okay, and we have Councillor Jennifer Rayner, Cabinet Member, Helen Morgan-Rees, and we also have Emily Jane Davis, who's our new Scrutiny Officer as well, just watching. Okay, hand over to Lyndon.
Great, thanks very much, Michelle, and thank you everyone for inviting me to carry on for the next year as your chair. We've had an interesting last year, and of course very difficult times and challenging times in education, but we're certainly getting there. Could I say that are there any disclosure of personal and prejudicial interests?
Just say son working in the Swansea school.
Okay, yes. Anyone else?
Yes, my son works in Swansea school.
And my daughter primary school.
Okay. I think you've all got dispensations, haven't you, for that? Is that right?
Yes.
There we are.
Okay, great. Thanks. Then we've got the letters and minutes of the previous meeting. Have you? I don't know if anybody's got any comments, or if you'd like to propose the minutes are correct.
I have no comments. I'm happy to propose the minutes.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Any a seconder?
Yes, I'll second.
Who was that? That was
Linda Tyler.
Okay, right, thank you. And any other comments? All agreed?
Yep.
Thank you very much. The next thing is public questions. I don't know if we've got any members of the public.
We haven't had any public questions received, so and nobody's contacted us, so
okay.
You can move on from that one.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the education recovery and return to schools. And can I welcome both Jen Rayner and Helen Morgan-Rees. Thank you very much. And I don't know which one of you is going to address this, or you both are, and who is going to go first? Your choice.
I think it would be useful if Helen took you through the report that's been prepared.
Okay, and then any comments then, pass if you'd like to make, and obviously everybody else. Helen, do you want to share the screen? I think Michelle will let you share the screen.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just putting the PowerPoint up now.
Thank you very much.
Okay, is that visible to everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll make a start. So thank you once again for the opportunity to come and talk to you really about how education has responded during a time of a public health crisis really. And this segment is about our recovery when we started back in education in September. So I'll just talk through a few slides if you don't mind, and happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I'm hoping that the next slide has appeared. Is that correct? Yeah. Can you see the next slide?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. It should be working fine. So obviously our recovery education was based on the fact that we needed to get as many children back into school by September as possible. And during the first fortnight of September, there was a period of grace to allow us to increase our operations in schools. And the expectation was by the 14th of September that we would be fully operational again here in Swansea. And indeed, we reached that position quite successfully. Now, the recovery of returning to that position was determined really by close working relationships and the formulation of a task and finish group. And that group did consist of head teachers, trade unions, officers of the authority, all working together to produce guidance and risk assessments that would minimise the risk of transmission of COVID-19 in our schools when children returned. So that group met through the course of September and indeed into the early part of October. And it has actually suspended activity for now due to its own success, but it will reconvene in December just to see if we need to review anything as time has gone on. So that development of local operational guidance to schools on top of the operational guidance offered by Welsh Government was key really to the success of our recovery and our return to education in Swansea. Obviously, in the summer months, we were looking at a lockdown period that meant that many of our children and young people were actually learning from at home, and they were learning remotely. So our development of a continuity of learning plan has served us well also in the months of September and October, because obviously we've had cases of COVID-19 in our schools, and those children have been asked then to self-isolate, and the return to a blended learning approach has been required. On top of our plan, we've developed a clear policy so that schools are far more able really to respond at short notice if children are asked to self-isolate. As we know, we have bubbles in primary schools that can consist of whole classes, but in secondary schools, our bubbles essentially are a whole year group of children or young people. One of the things that we've had to look at as well during the course of this term so far is the announcement of provision for free school meals during the holiday period between now really and Easter 2021, and that does include Easter 2021. So we are still providing payments, either direct payments to bank accounts or food parcels during the half-term period and other holidays between now and Easter. Obviously, compulsory education started on the 14th of September, and since then we've seen a good solid attendance rate in our schools across Swansea. There would be a few schools with lower attendance rates, and that has something to do with the isolation period, but it also has something to do with the confidence levels of our parents in asking their children to return. And I think at the early part of September, we had as many as 60 requests from parents asking to electively home educate their children. So since September, we've seen a good rate of attendance across our schools, and that's been stable for this period. Obviously, our stance across the council was to support our head teachers and leaders who had very difficult decisions to make in keeping their schools as COVID secure as possible. And we took a stance that if they were making any decisions based on a very solid risk assessment, that the council would support those decisions. And we made that very clear to head teachers right at the start of term. However, we do need to challenge all the operations to to ensure that they are continually operating at a safe level, and those risk assessments are being implemented to the full. And this week we have the Health and Safety Executive attending our schools across Swansea. We have about 9 schools receiving site visits from the Health and Safety executive officers to make sure that our schools are still COVID safe. We also received a virtual visit from our education regulator from Estin during the course of the first 6 weeks of returning to education in Swansea. And that was really to take stock of all the activities that we'd undertaken before September and during the first part of the autumn term. And it was also to take stock of our provision for vulnerable children during the main lockdown and also as they returned to education. So I'll go to the next slide, and I'm hoping that has moved forward. Yes, it has. So with our approach in the main lockdown, you will have heard us talk about a consistent set of principles, possibly working with our schools to agree a degree of consensus, really, that we were moving forward together and that we were gaining strength with all these decisions by doing them with our teachers and head teachers in mind. So our principles for opening in September were well known. We shared those principles with schools, and it enabled us to make decisions together. We also managed to see that the increase of our digital platforms, our Swansea Virtual School, which I spoke to you about in July, we saw a greater uptake there, and that was really a positive approach. And we also saw that the national platform, the hub platform by Welsh Government, was also seeing a significant increase of uptake of digital use during the first part of this term. One of the activities that we conducted with primary schools in the summer term was a review of how they were approaching blended learning. And we undertook a second review with our secondary schools during the first 6 weeks of our term, this autumn term. And our rapid review of blended learning in secondary schools gave us a high level of confidence that our schools were able to switch if they had year groups isolating. We also saw schools receive a specific grant to help children catch up, and it was called the Accelerated Learning Programme. So schools would have received that grant to enable them to add to their workforce capacity, to add additional teaching and learning time to specific groups of learners that would need it the most. And those priority groups would have been determined by schools themselves locally, but the main thrust of it was to ensure that there were more teachers potentially in the system. We also saw during the first part of this half term that our school workforce were given priority in terms of testing, and that's really important, because if a member of the school workforce is waiting for a test, then that member of staff very often has to be replaced, and that can have a cost implication and a teaching and learning implication for pupils at any school. What we tried to adopt in Swansea was a proportionate response, where we saw cases coming into schools, children having COVID from the community. We wanted to take as much of a proportionate response as possible. However, our guidance and advice comes from environmental health officers. So when a decision is made to reduce the operation in any school, it is made in partnership with the test, trace and protect colleagues in terms of any decisions that need to be made. We felt that during these uncertain periods that our communication with parents and indeed our head teachers and the whole of any school community had to be very clear. And we adopted a strategy that we would communicate clearly and frequently with our stakeholders. And the next part of our slide really is providing you with an update of where we need to focus our energies next. So I'm happy to take questions on the previous slides in terms of our recovery and how we managed it in Swansea.
Great, thank you very much, Helen, very grateful. Right, are there any questions? Cyril.
Sorry, there is one slide, Chair, that I've skipped over, and that's my fault. Do you mind if I revisit it first?
No, do that, and I've got
Sorry.
3 hands up for questions. Yes, please do.
Thank you. So just to close on the last slide, just to say that during the months of September and October, that the national statutory curriculum is now, the days within that curriculum were downgraded, and that was to enable teachers to focus on the well-being and welfare of children as they return to education in September. We also use the catalyst that the first lockdown provided with us to us. We use that as a catalyst really to learn and to do things differently. So the way we operate now as a department, interfacing with our school partners, is very much different, and we don't intend to switch back to anything that would have caused us more time and concern previous to COVID. I've mentioned the prioritisation of well-being of pupils, so focused on the well-being of school staff and in particular school leaders, who have had to make very difficult decisions right at the start of term to make sure their establishments were working well. And we've tried to encourage our governors across Swansea to ask those questions of their head teachers in particular to ensure that their well-being is being looked after. We did provide our schools during the summer months and in the run-up to the return to education with some really good advice on resilience, on transition back, and also bereavement. And we've provided that advice in conjunction with our educational psychology service here in Swansea. We did ensure that when schools did return, that we had capacity to check in with them. So at certain points, we were checking in daily during the summer term. And as we returned, we were still checking in to check on the welfare of head teachers and any issues the schools had. We did offer as well a drop-in session for HR and for health and safety. So that gave our school leaders some opportunities really to ask further questions that were pertinent to their settings. And just to close then, we have had obviously some concern about what happens during the examinations, and there's been an independent review of examinations in respect of 2020, but also with a forward look about what happens next. We were expecting to hear from tomorrow actually on what may happen in 2021, but the announcement now is due on the 9th of November, so we wait to hear what the announcement will be, but I know it's very much eagerly awaited by our staff and our students in secondary schools. And that's it from me, thank you.
Great, thank you, Helen. Right, Cyril, did you want to ask a question? Because you had your hand up and it's...
Yeah,
yes.
thanks.
There we go.
I'd like to ask, how many children are for home learning on a PC? Are there any children that we are struggling to get PCs out to them or whatever?
Obviously, when we had a conversation about this in the summer months, we'd issued a lot of kit, a lot of laptops and a lot of connectivity devices out to homes. And obviously some of that has now come back in. But during this period, we've adopted a very flexible approach to ensure that any digitally excluded pupil still receives that kit and the connectivity device we need. And we will continue to monitor that carefully. I'll give you an example. We have a secondary school that's now facing the fire break scenario. On the 2nd of November, that school may have a couple of children that need to come into school because they haven't got the connectivity or the space to work and learn on a digital footing at home. So we have got a couple of incidences, but we're encouraging our schools to communicate with us so we can help them if they need any help. But in the main, we're confident that those who need it when they're working at home now have got some kind of device to help them.
Okay, thank you.
Steve.
Thank you, Chair. You were correct, and just a comment in relation to examinations. My son teaches in Alpha, and yes, he's desperately waiting to find out what's going on and disappointed about the delay. My question is around numbers of children not in school. Now, I know you mentioned earlier the ones that you know about and have asked permission, but what about the ones who haven't asked permission to be home? Have you got some sort of numbers in relation to that? And to help you to follow up, how will we check, particularly in relation to safeguarding?
Thank you. In terms of attendance, we know that currently it's around 90% across Swansea. And at this time of year, you'd normally expect it to be about 93% in Swansea schools. So we know there's a gap there in terms of the numbers of children who would expect to be in schools. And 60 requests to home educate doesn't cover the whole of that gap. So we have specific welfare calls from our schools to the homes to encourage some of the parents who may have lost confidence and may be worried that their child will catch COVID. So we are doing some welfare checks from the school. We also have the Education Welfare Office that will follow up on some of those calls from schools to the home if required. And we also have a safeguarding officer in education. And if there are any particular concerns, we'll work across education, social services to make sure that no child is left unseen. And if children obviously aren't coming to school and we have no good reason, then we will follow it up through our education welfare officers. And I think that really covers all the aspects really in terms of absence. Currently, there is no penalty for not attending school. So that is still in place, and we've adopted a very supportive, encouraging stance really to try and encourage these families to send their children back. But there may be specific concerns that we still need to work on and have conversations with those families.
Thank you. And are we confident that we've spoken with all the families that haven't attended?
Yes, because of the normal checks around attendance. But we did have during the main lockdown period a specific list really in terms of our vulnerable children. So we asked our schools to identify the ones they thought that were vulnerable, and across Swansea we had about 3,000 learners that were vulnerable for whatever reason, and then we narrowed down that list to make sure that we were looking at the children where there was risk of harm during the lockdown period, and that specific list has been scrutinised very carefully, and we've checked up to make sure that those children are now back in school and attending, and if they're not, we're following it up. So we've got confidence that in terms of safeguarding and seeing children, we are asking the right questions.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I also, sorry, could I come in here a bit, Lyndon?
Okay.
And just say on that very theme, I think it's important to highlight the fact that throughout the lockdown period and during the summer holidays and during the return to school from September, Operation Encompass has continued working. So if we hear via the police service of any situations where we feel children might be in very difficult situations, that is shared with schools. You're able to intervene at that point as well. So there is, it's not a closed book, it's an open book. And I think we have staff sufficiently finely tuned and trained to be able to step in and act positively.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Al.
Can I say something as well in my turn?
Yeah, can you come in after Al? Because he's been sort of waiting.
Signal on my machine, that's why I'm just alerting.
Okay, right. Al, are you there? Well, Linda, do you want to come in now?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, I can. Yes, there we are.
Very sorry, very sorry. Yeah, apologies for being late to everyone and the chair. 2 questions, if I could be so greedy. The first question is related to COVID. Helen, as interim director, has graciously responded to a query relating to my own particular school's finances, particular challenges around that, and thank you very much for your reply. And I was just wondering whether or not, as part of a broader question in Swansea, the department and the authority are collating the kind of costs that are being COVID-related costs. But I understand there's a challenge or potential challenge in terms of recouping those costs. So if we don't recoup those costs, do we have any idea at scale what the be and how what kind of approaches to any contingency planning around that? So that's my first question, please.
Okay, thank you. I'll respond. In terms of collating the costs, yes, that's been carefully done through colleagues in finance. So every school support officer in terms of finance will be very much aware of any claims that are being made. What's difficult at the moment is that any credit coming back into the council, there's obviously a lag behind. So we're now in Q3 in terms of the financial year. But we may have only just received the Q1 credits for anything we've claimed against in terms of the Welsh Government's hardship fund. So there is a lag behind in knowing precisely what's been paid out and what hasn't been. But we've always been consistent in terms of the criteria we've offered to schools, and we've repeated this message often, where we've said consistently that it has to be additional and unavoidable cost. So we've made it clear on that basis. Yes, there could be refusal in terms of what we're claiming, but on the grounds and the stipulations we've provided to schools, we're fairly confident that money will follow, but there are no guarantees. And in terms of contingency then, obviously, if that would place any school in a difficult position because they'd overspent and not received any credit for it, then we would have to look carefully at a recovery plan that would have to be approved for that school. So we do have a contingency in allowing schools to go into a deficit position, but only with permission to do so and with a caveat that a recovery plan is in place.
Okay, thank you for that detail. So my question is really getting at whether or not there's a figure, sorry to dig into this a little bit, but whether or not, if worst case scenario, next cohort of claims, next bunch of claims get denied by the Welsh Government, is there any kind of feeling, because we are in a deficit position at our school and we're putting in any costs, but we still have to operate, and so there must be other schools like us and staring at a shortfall that is unavoidable costs, which is covering staff costs, and this must be happening across the county. So there must be a worst case X amount of cash, if you like, that isn't recouped in the worst case scenario, and then there is a shortfall across a range in areas across Swansea. But just a challenge really on that, whether or not that kind of planning is taken to see if that's contingency and the approval would need to be done on a school by school basis. Is there going to be some kind of fast track approval process with that, or is there planning around that particular?
I think I need to come back to you on some of those points. But what I would say is that obviously some of what's happening is causing schools to incur costs. An example of that would be a delay in a test result coming back to a member of staff in the school. So a fortnight ago, test results would have been received quite promptly. And then as we speak today, those test results, there's a lag behind, and maybe it's 5 or 6 days before test result is actually
That's right.
arriving. So that is an example of a cost we didn't have to go, and suddenly we're getting of example where, you know, we didn't anticipate that this would be the case. So it's very difficult, I would say, to make contingency plans, because
I appreciate that.
this is uncharted for everybody, and as much as we would hope really that the costs would be patent and obvious, that's not always the case. But I think our communication with schools is as much as we can do to keep them buoyant and to keep that criteria clear in their heads.
Thank you. Yes.
Al,
Got one more question, but happy to come back later if that's okay, to let others come in.
Okay, Mike Day.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to follow up on that previous question and response. And Helen, just concerned about the delay in test results coming through for school-based staff. Now, whether this is specifically related to school-based staff or a general issue, I'm not really concerned in one sense. But I'm more concerned in terms of what actions have we been able to take as an authority to ensure that test results do come back quickly. You know, I thought there was additional provision being made with test centres around the city and Fairwood and so on and so forth. But so I was just a little bit taken aback and surprised that there should be that delay. So, you know, my question really is, what action has been taken to ask and to push forward for quicker responses? And is there anything further that we could be doing as a scrutiny panel to you know, support the requirement to get done? I appreciate now we're coming into half term, but you know, so maybe it's not going to be such an issue next week, but certainly in the future, you know, we need to make sure that we are getting the test results back quickly.
Could I come in on that? Because I think this is a whole council issue. Certainly we have opened up more testing stations. And you mentioned how Penclouth has now moved out to Fairwood, and we've got the Grand Theatre, still one over in Penarail, Town Hill, in addition to the Liberty Stadium site, and we've also got some shared opportunities with Neath Port Talbot. However, we seem to have hit not just the issue of the Lighthouse Company, which is a sort of conglomerate, has not been able to deal with this additional demand to handle the tests. So I know the leader and a number of cabinet members, especially Clive Lloyd, who's responsible for adult services, because this is a critical issue for care homes, have been emphasising the need that there has to be more testing capacity within the system. My understanding was a week ago that we were going to contact more of the universities and see if we can bring in more lab experience. But to date, I have not heard anything. I think part of the problem is we are tied in within Wales to the Lighthouse system.
Okay.
Thanks. In response to Councillor Day, I would also say that of our school workforce, they haven't always identified themselves as critical workers. So that's a piece of work we need to do to ensure that they're ticking the right box, because if they tick the right box, they get a test sooner and presumably they'll be prioritised for the results sooner as well. So we really need to emphasise to our schools, teachers and TAs that they are critical workers, and they may not have identified themselves as such up until now, but they need to.
Okay, thank you. Linda Tyler Lloyd, that is.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Yesterday I went to the governing body of Mayo School and I was very impressed, but two things have come out that I think I want to pass on. It might be a question, but it might also just be a comment. I think that the money that they have been given, the extra money they have used to enable of the teachers to be working full-time on checking up on the children at home, the children who are not coming into school for whatever reason, making sure that they're linked up with video and looking after the care of the pupil and the family. So I think that's a good point. I wondered if other schools are doing similar. And the second point that I was very impressed with, we were shown charts of, they have done a piece of work on each form to see where they are with the gaps of learning. They have found that the actual reading has improved. So obviously they've been doing a lot of reading at home. The parents have been working on that. I think the maths is not so good, and I can understand that parents are perhaps finding it difficult to follow up with the maths. And in consequence, the teachers now know where the targets that they've got to hit. And also they're making a worksheet for the parents on simple things that the parents can help with the children at home. Now, their question was, they wanted to know, are any of the other schools, have they done charts on where the gaps are in the learning because of the lockdown? And, you know, are there any other hints that schools are doing that they could pick up on? Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Absolutely appropriate by the sounds of it, some of the activity there, and to be emulated across schools, definitely. I am aware that many schools in Swansea are testing, assessing, just to identify the gaps, exactly as you described. And I'm hearing in other schools that reading, they're in a deficit position in terms of catch up with certain groups, and they need to prioritise those groups. But it sounds as if the additional grant money being utilised really to additional staff are focusing on vulnerable learners and vulnerable children is absolutely appropriate. And children who were not vulnerable prior to COVID may have suddenly become vulnerable in their learning or vulnerable in other ways. So I think being able to identify carefully who those are, and we can't presume to know who they are, is absolutely a worthwhile activity. The only word of caution would be that obviously the welfare and well-being is the priority coming back, and some over-assessing is probably not good for anybody. And I would hope that children feel that they're not being tested and weighed too much across Swansea, not in this particular school. But in terms of disseminating good practice in the primary sector in the summer months, we did share across all our primary schools what other schools were doing, and we will repeat that activity as schools now. We haven't done it yet, but it's worthwhile in terms of dissemination, and we'll seek to do that soon.
Okay, great, thanks. Al, you've still got your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so my second question was really around planning in relation to a potential full lockdown. If that were to occur again, fingers crossed and all the rest of it, schools seem to be kept open, whatever, under the current sort of thinking, but to imagine that it might actually happen. Would the community hub model be employed again? Question, if that were the case.
Yeah, I can categorically say that the emergency childcare hubs model is not likely to be revisited. And the propensity of a full lockdown in the education sector is unlikely. Any future fire breaks or mini lockdowns would obviously be determined by the R number. Yeah. And in terms of the decision around this current fire break, obviously the older pupils, the impact on the R number from their perspective would have had a moderate impact potentially, and that's the rationale behind year 9s and above staying home from the 2nd of November onwards. But certainly there's no intention to revisit those emergency childcare hubs. And the priority for Welsh Government and for us as an Education Directorate is to keep learning going as much as possible. And there will be disruptions ahead, we know, but we need to minimise the disruptions because we know that we've made our schools as COVID safe as possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, Helen can move on. Not at all. Helen, if you'd like to go on to the next stage.
Okay, so you also asked us to present you with a picture really of what we were focusing on in education. So I've just provided one slide around that. In education, we have a set of priorities, and it's not for me as a director or an interim director to determine what those priorities are. We ask our staff across the directorate to contribute to those priorities. So we're in the middle of our consultation, which ends tomorrow, with our department staff, and we will have a finalised set of priorities for 2020-21 academic year. But our priorities for this year are not dissimilar to those we were working on last year. And obviously, because of the disruption of COVID, we need to complete work in significant areas. So I'll just give you an example, not referring to this slide in particular, but what our current priorities are. And they are obviously to implement a positive behaviour policy. We are also delivering our local Swansea ALN strategy for additional learning needs. We are looking ahead also to having leadership developed across schools and to continue to do that. We are also looking at our Band B programme and continuing with that and developing that further. And we also have obviously our safeguarding priority, which is to ensure that learners are kept safe at all times in safe environments and with safe staffing as well. But looking forward, obviously in this slide, we've focused on some of the matters that are most pressing to us, and obviously they potentially would be included in your programme for scrutiny, but I just wanted to highlight what they are. So obviously we have made huge strides in creating a more successful AOTIS provision across Swansea, and in particular our emphasis on the development of the new pupil referral unit. We've nearly reached completion. This week we've been recruiting staff to the new pupil referral unit, and in December we expect there will be a handover of keys and that pupils will attend the new site in Cocket for the pupil referral unit. So that's very much a focus, a current live focus for our priorities going forward. As I said earlier, additional learning needs, we're trying to improve the provision across Swansea, to streamline our processes and to ensure that every learner gets a good offer in terms of attending their mainstream school in the main, but also that our specialist provision across Swansea is strengthened as much as possible. Keeping learners safe will always be a top priority for us, but obviously the COVID-19 has made that an even sharper focus recently. So we've put that as a clear priority going forward. Building digital capacity in education, that's part of the work that's come out of a previous policy development committee. And obviously it's part of the new curriculum, and it has a bearing on future occupations and the city deal here in Swansea. So we will continue to focus our minds on building digital capacity through infrastructure and also training of our school-based staff. Implementation of the new curriculum, that stems obviously from some current work and recommendations from the policy development committee looking at the curriculum. So we have the third and fourth stages of our strategy around implementing the new curriculum, and that's to be looked at this academic year. And we also want to ensure that the professional learning offer during these strange times is not diminished. So as you know, it's very difficult to release staff to be trained because of maybe lack of staff at certain times because of the COVID. So we're trying to ensure that the professional learning offer is digitised and that we can get that learning offer out to as many teachers as we can, and they can access it at a time then that suits them. So those are the current priorities we want to focus on this year, on top of our existing priorities.
Great, thank you very much, Helen. Any questions? I'm sure there are.
Could I just make a point about the AOTUS provision? We're very excited about the new build for the PRU, but the AOTUS programme is not just the PRU, it is the really important work in mainstream schools, providing additional support, but also really innovative ideas for a curriculum and the way pupils learn. I think last year you visited Pentrahavod to school to see what they were doing, which I hope you found a very useful experience. We have Dylan Thomas and Birchgrove also developing amazing programs in support and working closely with organisations like the Prince's Trust. So everyone, there is a tendency saying AOTUS is just the PRU, but it's the whole package, the really important package in mainstream schools.
Great, thanks, Jen. I think, you know, I can speak on behalf of everyone. When we visited Pentrahavod School, gosh, I think we all found it quite inspirational, and the work that was actually going on there. And there were some real examples for everybody right across Swansea. It was excellent. And also, you mentioned Dylan Thomas School. And, you know, if you look at some of their results on paper, but when you they're quite different when you actually visit that school and you see the fantastic work that's going on, and how they had team leaders from that school who took us around. They were the best ambassadors for that school that you could imagine. So in both those counts, you know, we learned an awful lot, and they are doing a fantastic job.
I think linked with that is, until very recently, success in the secondary sector was very often related to measurement of GCSE and A-level work, with no clear referencing to the high quality vocational training that was ongoing. Well, now over 50% of pupils in Swansea take vocational courses, sometimes alongside GCSEs, and I think this has had an enormous impact in how they themselves and staff and employers view education. It's certainly improving their employability, and many of the courses they're following and the work they're doing is of exceptionally high standard.
Indeed, thanks very much. Right, any questions for Helen? Helen, no, nothing at all. Well, thank you very much. Jen, do you want to come in on anything? You said you wanted to come in after Helen, although I know you contributed on the way through.
I'm very pleased you've had a chance to give a good grilling to the Interim Director of Education. First full experience of scrutiny, I believe. I would like to say that the Education Department is working fantastically well as a team. You heard about the Return to School Task and Finish group. They started work in June, July. They were all back. At least 2 weeks we had meetings before schools opened. They have worked extremely well. The meetings have been open and frank, which have been useful for thrashing out any problems. There is a lot of confidence now with their head teachers that they can say what they want, and what they're saying will be seriously listened to and respected. And I think that is really, really important, that everyone sees each other as an equal, and an equal in contributing to the way forward. So I'm very, very pleased at the moment the way the department is running. We're making big inroads with ALN, I think because we suddenly have the ear of health, which has been quite difficult to get hold of for a number of years, but they are actually in a dialogue with us now in a number of settings. I think it's really good what's happening. For the first 2 weeks of school, to help schools settle down and to ensure we had sufficient cleaners, the council funded free school meals either via backs or food parcels for another 2 weeks, which took a lot of pressure off. How are we going to start moving these different groups of pupils through canteens, especially the secondary sector? That is still really challenging. So I'm more than happy with where we are at the time. Done without this lockdown, like a hole in the head. We have all been waiting for a definitive comment on the exams, because the longer we leave it, you suddenly start thinking of it, if not how many days to Christmas, but how many days to the first exam. And that is worrying for teachers, parents, and especially our pupils. But we await the final decision, and whatever happens, I feel confident Swansea schools will do the best they can for our pupils. So I'd like to have it placed on record, the amazing work that has gone on since lockdown in March, to everyone involved in education, yourselves included as Scrutiny, because I know you are big supporters of our schools, and that is so helpful that we can actually face our heads and say, look, it might be bad, fear not, everyone's on the same page. So thank you to everyone.
Great, thank you very much, Jen. And I also would like to thank everybody involved with education, and the teachers, head teachers in the school and the staff, because they really have, risen to the challenge. And it has been challenging because they've all had to pick up on digital learning, actually remote learning, and so on. It's been a huge learning curve. But certainly it's it's a great credit, but also to the pupils across Swansea, because they've had a really challenging time, and they've missed out on a number of things at the end of term. As Al and I know in Bishopston, where some of the pupils there would have looked forward to parties and get-togethers. None of that was possible in school in the same way. So really, thanks to them, because they really, they will remember this for many years to come, and I hope they'll realise that that they played their part as well, and I think that is important. So thank you very much. Are there any questions to Helen or Jen now? No. Yeah. Oh yes, we have with Mike. Yeah. Mike Day.
Thanks. Just following on from your previous comment, Lyndon, I wondered whether we could perhaps take the unusual step of having a convener's letter sent to the interim director, expressing our thanks and admiration for the work that's been done, not just to school-based staff, as Jan has indicated, but to all staff, and for that letter to be published in some way to the staff themselves. If there's a mechanism for doing that, I think that would be great, because one of the things that I think all of us have been concerned about is that the emphasis within schools and education settings has been very much upon the health and welfare, as it rightly is, of the pupils, but there is danger then that we lose sight of the education goals. And it's been pleasing to hear from Jen the progress that's being made, and echo the comments and support the comments completely of what she said in relation to, for example, EOTAS, not just being focusing on a specific building, but the provision that's going on throughout. Just a couple of other comments on that. I think first of all, it's a shame in retrospect that the unions didn't agree to the additional week in July, which would have resulted in a 2-week half term, which is effectively what we have now. The other thing that I'd just like to ask from a scrutiny panel's point of view is whether we could have, as a kind of a regular update on how things are going. I know that we don't again want to take our focus off education related issues, but this is important, and grateful to Helen for the work that she's done in bringing to our attention those matters today. But I think it would be useful for us to have a regular update, and in a sense it's leading on to the next item on the agenda in terms of the work programme, but it would be good, I think, from my point of view, and I'm sure from other members' point of view, just to know that things are going in the right direction, and we could have a report for information, not necessarily a presentation from Helen on every occasion, but I find that useful. Thank you.
Happy to do so.
Yes. Could I think Mike's suggestion of a letter to be published would be well received. I don't know if we can persuade Phil Roberts to put it in total on his blog page so that everyone in the council is aware of this. On the communications, could I ask how many members of the scrutiny panel get the weekly newsletter that goes out to schools? Maybe that would be a way of improving communication, because that has the what's happening, what's going on, what training is available, what support, etc. I know a number of governing bodies do share that with all their governors, but it is an extremely useful and informative document, and the wider audience we can get for that, I think, would be helpful.
It's a good idea.
So if we could add Michelle to the mailing list, and then she can distribute it to panel members.
Sorry, Chair, just a quick question in response to Councillor Rayner's suggestion there. Are you proposing in that newsletter an update on scrutiny and the education panel's most recent activity as a regular thing in that update? Sorry, I'm not quite familiar with that newsletter.
The newsletter is the internal newsletter between the education department and between schools.
Oh, that I do get that right. So I know that's the one from Agnatia with the training update. I think that's the one that you're talking about. Yeah. Okay. So because this perhaps question about communication of this panel to governing bodies and whether or not it's a pull on their behalf. So in terms of raising this and this thanks and this how grateful we are, which is absolutely needs to be communicated. So the communication of the work of the panel, are we expecting people to happen across that work and to go to the, or would it make sense for this panel's work or a recent update to be sent as a matter of governing bodies to update them? Is that something? Am I just speaking out of line?
That's entirely for you to consider. I would say all these scrutiny papers, letters, etc., appear on the council's website. Not just for governors, for other, but I have to say what might be an issue in your school as a governor might not, having listened to the conversation today, be an issue in other schools.
Well, we'll never know. But what I do know is that I don't get much contact as the primary school representative for governing bodies in Swansea. So as the co-optee on this scrutiny panel, I often there, how do I represent? And I could make individual overtures to all governing bodies. What I need to do in order to bring questions to this panel that are relevant and timely. But I was also thinking the panel is absolutely key to all of these governing bodies in primary schools. I can't speak for comprehensive schools and the decision that we're performing. So it is of interest to all governing bodies. And maybe we should be, as a matter of course, sending the updates to them to invite them to check out our papers. Document might be useful.
Helen will be able to provide more detail, but we do have an association of school governors.
I know poorly attended. I've been along, so this is a panel, I'm sure, but I'm just thinking about how the information flows and how the scrutiny is. So we can all bring our own individual questions to this as representatives, but how do we get those out there in our community that we are representing know about the work that we're doing? And if we're just expecting them to come, perhaps this isn't working as well as it could be, or that nobody out there in governing bodies simply can't be the case. So this isn't necessarily a question for you, Councillor Rayner. I'm just posing a question in response to your suggestion.
Thank you. I would reply, I think that is a matter for the scrutiny panel to consider.
Yes, thank you.
Michelle, I'm wondering who the vice chair is. I believe that the chair has frozen.
Oh, is he frozen? Oh dear. It's Cyril, actually. We've got Cyril. Oh, I think Lyndon's. Let me see if I can ring him back. Make sure he's. Let's try him. No. Oh, he's gone. Is Cyril? Are you still there? Cyril Anderson?
He doesn't seem to be in the list of participants now.
Oh, must have gone. Oh, there we are. Let's see if we can get Lyndon back. Oh, is he back? I've got him on the list here now.
Seems to be in the list, doesn't he? Yeah.
A minute, let me just try one more. Let me go into participants and ring him to see if we can get him back. Otherwise, it's only the work plan. So, Lyndon, let's type him in. One sec.
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, he's back.
Yeah, I'm on my iPad now, so sorry about this. Yeah, there you go.
Nightmare. Technology.
Technology, yeah, my desktop, I don't know what happened there. Right, the next item on the, sorry, in answer to Al, I think, as you know, you obviously are the representative for the governing bodies and so on, it is possibly a good thing for us to do to inform those what we do. And shall we ask Michelle to see how we can actually implement that?
I was going to suggest, well, what we do is we do a blog out of Scrutiny. Obviously, if you've not done it for a little while, but we do a blog of all the work we do, and that links to all the papers as well that are online, but also a little summary of the letter. That might be a good thing, which can then link back to the papers for more detail. Something like that might be quite useful. And people just need to register then for our blog, and they'll get regular sort of updates, and they can go in and look. I don't know if that would help.
Michelle, I'm sorry, but I know that we've got so many technically challenged people on governing bodies across Swansea. I love a good blog, and I do read them, you know. But perhaps we could discuss this at another session, because I've got a few ideas on how this could be done, and I do work in that sort of business myself. So perhaps
well, if you can email them to me, that would be fantastic. Email me your ideas, and we can then discuss them as that would be fantastic.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I've now, let me just dig the agenda, because I had it on screen on my iPad. Now I'm using my iPad.
I tell you what I can do, Lyndon, is I've got its work program next, and I can share our screen so we can all have a look at it.
Okay, great.
Save you trying to find it. There we are. Let me get it up now. Let's pop it on here. Share, and we should have it here. Oh, it's gone. There we are. Did have it. There it is. Right. Can everyone see it? Can you see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Lovely.
Okay. Do you want to go through that, Michelle?
Yeah. This is your draft work program, your suggested work program for the coming year. This is a combination of things, really. This is some of the stuff that obviously couldn't be done, which included Wine When Primary. Obviously, it was March through the summer, so we've tried integrating those things. There's a number of things that you've decided you want to have a watching brief on, and also there's some annual items in here, and then there's 2 schools which have been mentioned, or 3 schools actually, but 2 which have been mentioned where you may want to look at the current performance. So all those things have been plotted in, and then of course there was a Scrutiny work planning conference last week, and a few things came out of that as well, including children taken out of school, so that's elective home education basically, education other than at school update, which we can include in, and also 21st Century Schools programme also came up, which I haven't got on there. I was going to suggest that the education other than at schools update and the 21st Century Schools programme will have, because we haven't got the May meeting in yet, that we pop those in the May meeting. I've spoken to Helen Morgan-Rees, and she's agreed that they will do an update for you at the next meeting on the 19th, after you've spoken to Wine When, about children who have been taken out of school, elective home education, and the increase in that, to give a bit of background and some data. So it's just really whether you're happy with this, and is there anything that you would like to add or move around or whatever. And if you're happy, can we agree? Obviously, it's still flexible, but it gives us a framework to work to.
Is everybody happy with the programme?
Yes.
Can I make a couple of comments? I'm very happy with the programme. What I would like is, if we could, in any event, have, shall I call it an exceptions item on every agenda? What I mean by that is that in the event of something going wrong, or something that you know, that either the interim director or the cabinet member would like us to look at, that we have that capacity, that we don't fill it out with things in advance, as it were, that we have the flexibility. And I think you mentioned that word in any event, Lyndon, and you know, to enable us to look at issues that might be a cause for concern, shall I say. And the other thing I just wanted to do was to ask whether the Policy Development Committee is also developing a work programme, because it would be useful for us to have sight of that as well, so that we would be able to potentially work together on any issues which you know, we'd have in common, rather than being conscious of the pressures on staff in particular and the cabinet member. We wouldn't want them to have to cover the same areas in both forum, as it were. So I think it would be good if we could, if there was a work programme for that particular group as well, to have sight of that, so that we can coordinate our activities with them.
Yeah, they should be available soon, all the work programmes. We usually do share them across, don't we? They're two different, you know, but I think it's usually done by the SBC, but it'd be quite useful for us to have it as well, wouldn't it, to see what they're doing in education as well. I was going to say, I think, sorry, we haven't put on there, was what you were saying about having an update from Helen.
Could I just flag up an issue there? There is a considerable difference between the role of scrutiny and the PDC. And I'm not quite sure if you thought how they would overlap.
I totally accept that.
I'm aware, Mike, that your party doesn't participate in PDCs, so there's a difference between scrutiny
I totally accept that, and you know, not in any way thinking or suggesting that the work should be the same. Quite clearly, the work of the Policy Development Committee is, as the name suggests, to develop policy, and it's our role to scrutinise that. And what I want to ensure is that we have the opportunity of looking at undertaking our scrutiny function in connection with any policy developments that come up. And just in that particular regard, it could very well be that if there are standard, for want of a better phrase, for information type reports that are going on, that we don't want to ask officers necessarily to have to duplicate effort. And I'm sure you would appreciate it as well, knowing how busy the role is from personal experience, that you know, we wouldn't want necessarily to have to ask people to do you know, presentations, let's say, on a particular topic. But I totally appreciate and accept what you said in terms of the focus being very different in the two groups. Yeah,
Mike, yeah, they are. The focus is different. I sit on the, along with Councillor Miles Langston, we both sit on the Policy Development Committee on Education. But I'll certainly have a word with Councillor Robert Smith about that, and understand what you're saying and see what we can do, because you know, there may be things that we would like to see before they actually become policy even. So I'll have a word with Robert and get back to the committee.
Thank you.
So I was going to suggest that maybe in if you have, because you're saying you might like a regular update from Helen with regard to what's happening with the COVID situation, etc., in schools. Shall I put something in for December? I know that when you're going to have two quite substantial items, and it's only sort of a month away. So maybe an update in December, and then you can decide when you want the next one. Would that be okay?
Sure. When are we going to slot in the children being taken out of school and educated at home?
That's 19th of November. They're coming in. Helen's coming to do that. Yeah, on the 19th.
Okay. I know that Councillor Mary Jones raised that at the Scrutiny Programme Committee, and it was something that members were concerned about.
Would you like to invite Mary, as she was one of the people who rose it, you know, who raised the issue, if she wanted to come to the meeting as well, and discuss it if she's got particular?
Very happy to, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Or to give you the sort of issues that she's got with that as well. There we are.
Great. Yeah, great. So is everybody happy with the programme?
Yep.
Could I just say, you heard Helen say that the Task and Finish group would be meeting again in December to review the impact of COVID on risk assessments, etc. And yet you've just said you want to discuss COVID again in November. Would it not be better to have that meeting after the Task and Finish group has reviewed?
Yeah,
I think. Sorry, we've got. I think we have in November. We've got Wine When, and we've got the information on children being taken out of school, elective home education, and then I think for December to add an item there, which would be the sort of COVID update. I think that was a suggestion if members were happy with that.
Yeah. Any comments, anyone? Okay, we'll do that then. We'll add that into the December meeting. Good. Are there any other matters you want to discuss about the programme? If not, I'd like to thank you all for coming along, and our next meeting is on Thursday, the 19th of November. Look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Have a safe journey home.
Thanks very much.